My name is Hannah, and this is my beauty budget. Hey y'all. Whew, I just got done with a marathon of overhead filming. I decluttered my eyeshadow palettes, which is what today's video is going to be. And then I depotted some palettes, the palettes that I chose to depot in this video, and then I decluttered my singles. It was hours and hours and hours of filming, but it was really fun, and it's great because it means that all three of these videos, this one and then the other two, are all coming for you in the near future. In fact, if I don't manage to finish compiling all of the data for the ethical consumerism video, they will come 1, 2, 3 right in a row. Those will be the next 3 videos. But I'm actually hoping that the ethical consumerism video will come sooner than that. I'm hoping it will be maybe Wednesday's video or Friday's video, but either way, it's going to be a fun week ahead. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not subscribed. Should I say that? I've never said that before. The one and only time that I will say, hit subscribe if you're not subscribed. Who am I? Anyway, there's nothing to say in this introduction. There's nothing. I decluttered my eyeshadow palettes. It's incredibly straightforward. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. Okay, so here are all of my eyeshadow palettes, and this really is all of them. I don't have any other quads, little palettes, anything else floating around in my collection that could remotely be called an eyeshadow palette other than what is here. The only other eyeshadows I have are my singles, and I'm actually going to be filming my declutter of my single eyeshadows very soon, but I thought I would go ahead and go through my palettes first. So I'm just gonna go through from the top of the stack to the bottom and show you all of the palettes and show you which ones I'm going to keep, which ones I'm going to keep and depot, and which ones I am going to rehome. So right here on top I have the mini Natasha Danone Estar palette, and I know right away that I'm definitely going to be keeping this palette. I use this all the time. I throw it in my bag every time I've done a look that uses any eyeshadow that resembles any of these. I use this palette a lot on the go for touch-ups, and I also really like the quality of these little minis. I know that a lot of people claim that the mini Natasha Denona palettes don't have a formula that's as good as the full-sized ones. Whether or not that is true, the formula of these mini eyeshadows is really good to me, and I really love these shadows. I love this iridescent blue one. I love the mattes as well, actually. I really like these creamy mattes. So I get a lot of good use out of this, and even though I do own the full-size Star palette, it's down here, second to last in this stack, I still feel like it's worth it to me to have this one around because I use this for a purpose that my larger palette doesn't serve. Next up is this little Smashbox palette. This is the Smashbox Cover Shot Smoky Eye palette. I really do like the color story in here because it is so grungy. So we've got this grungy gold, this grungy silver, this kind of grungy green, which is somewhat unique to my collection, as is this silvery grungy red, and then these beautiful transition shades and mattes that are easy to use, this kind of grungy greenish color. I've really enjoyed having this palette in my collection. However, the last time I reached for it, I didn't exactly shop my stash for it, but I made it my business to use this palette every day for a couple of days in a row because I was starting to feel unsure of whether or not I wanted to keep it, and I actually struggled a little bit with it. I struggled to get the mattes to perform as well as they have in the past. Either that or I've learned more about eyeshadow since I got this palette, and I've learned that these mattes really aren't all that great. But either way, my use of it for several days in a row pretty recently when I was trying to decide about it made me decide that I don't love it anymore. It's this matte right here, this kind of grungy green, that I was kind of keeping this palette for because I don't think I have anything else like that in my collection. But when I used this matte recently, it just came off a little bit powdery. There wasn't that creamy, rich, dark payoff that I expect from a color like this at this point in my experience with eyeshadow, and so I think I'm going to rehome this palette. I've got to say, this is actually harder than I expected it to be, because I haven't been reaching for this palette and I felt really good about decluttering it because I have so much eyeshadow that I really love. But when I opened it and started looking at it and I saw these grungy metallics in here, I remembered why I bought this palette in the first place. I remembered why I like it, and I'm having those feelings like, I'm not sure. But I think it's the best choice. I really do want to let it go. Honestly, I have so much, and the only time I've used this over the past several months was a week during which I forced myself to use it so that I could decide whether or not I wanted to keep it. So even though the colors are beautiful, and I guess that's why I picked this back up to talk about it again. Even though the colors are beautiful and they're very me, and even though I like it, I am letting it go in the interest of allowing the other things that I love more to shine. Speaking of other things that I love more, this is my Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette, and I love this palette. Grungy metallics, all over the lid metallic looks, all shimmer looks, shimmery, sort of rich, powdery, but very pigmented shadows. The original Comfort Zone is such a beautiful work of art to me. I love this little thing. And I'm sad that Wet n Wild has reformulated not only their formula of their eyeshadows, but also reorganized the shapes of their pans, because I loved this old layout of the Wet n Wild pans. I have no desire to buy the new ones ever. I never even look at them when they come out. I'm just not checking for Wet n Wild eyeshadows anymore, which is fine because I don't need more eyeshadows. But it's a shame that this one is discontinued, because even though it was dirt cheap, it's one of my favorite palettes. Alright, this NARS palette, this NARS palette is a little bit on the chopping block, and I haven't decided about it. So, this is the NARS Loaded palette, and it was limited edition. It's no longer available. I pretty much bought it because I love NARS. I bought it because I love NARS, and they had come out with a palette, and it was pretty beautiful. And I've kept it for this color down here. This is a super grungy, kind of silvery, it's like a silvery gold that doesn't have mauve in it. It's really a lovely grungy shadow, and I do get some use out of this gold as well. I reached for this taupe a decent amount, though not lately, and I reached for this lid setting shade a decent amount, though not lately. I'm just not sure about this. I feel like it would be a shame to lose this eyeshadow, but it seems silly to keep a whole palette just for one shadow when I might be able to find a single. And honestly, I would love to give this to someone. I would love to give this to a cousin or a friend, someone who can use it to explore eyeshadow because it's such a nice palette. And again, it's something that I haven't been using very much. So I'm going to tentatively put it in the giveaway pile right now, and then at the very end I'm going to check in with my feelings and see how I feel about letting go of this little guy right here. Alright, the Alomar palette. I pretty much already know what I'm going to do with this one. I am going to depot this palette for a number of reasons. One, I don't really care for the packaging. Two, I'm not sure I want to keep all of the eyeshadows. Those are the only two reasons. I just think that I'll get a lot more use out of these. Oh, and three, the color story of this palette doesn't inspire me. I really love some of these shadows. I really love this sort of gorgeous, gooey gold up here. I really like these blues, but I don't think that I'm going to be reaching for this. In fact, I know that I'm not because I haven't been. I don't reach for this palette as a complete palette to do looks. I want to own some of these eyeshadows as singles and declutter the other ones. So I'm putting this in the depotting pile. And here we have my historically beloved Marc Jacobs About Last Night Style Eye-Con number 20. This is a beautiful palette. This is a beautiful palette. It's getting a bit old. I think it's a couple of years old. I don't feel ready to part with it, but I'm also aware that its life might be coming to an end, and I have somewhat of a sense of urgency about using this palette some more and spending more time with it before it goes off. So I'm not only going to keep this palette, I'm also going to try to remember to use it more frequently even than I already do. This palette contains a lot of go-to matte shades for me. So this light gray right here, this kind of mid-tone to dark charcoal gray right here, and some of these mid-toned purpley shades are kind of holding down the fort in my collection as the transition shades for looks that have these tones. So I do reach for this palette a lot. I would like to reach for it more. I would really like to get as much use as possible out of this beautiful baby before it goes bad. So I'm keeping it and I'm going to recommit to it. And my modern renaissance here is the reason that I have terror in my heart about this one going bad, because I believe that I bought my modern renaissance palette maybe 6 months, maybe 4 months before I bought this palette. And this palette has ceased to perform in the way that it used to perform for me. My favorite shadow in this palette, I believe, is Antique Bronze right here. I really like to do looks where I put this all over the lid, and you can just see, you can see by how it's swatched. It's just got this dustiness. I heard someone saying recently that when an eyeshadow goes bad, it's because the binding agent among the pigments has sort of lost its stickiness and become ineffective, so that it's no longer holding the pigments together and they sort of just poof away. And that's exactly what's going on with the eyeshadows in this palette right now, at least the ones that I use a lot. The other one, Realgar, it's historically been such a brilliant orange, and now when I put it on my lids, it blends out with this kind of dark patchiness. So I am going to go ahead and declutter my modern renaissance palette because I'm definitely not reaching for it anymore. And the last couple of times I tried it out to get a sense of whether or not it was still working. I did give it a couple of tries because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't all in my head that it seemed to have kicked the bucket. I just ended up with a completely untenable eye look. I think what I may do is find a friend who doesn't have very much eyeshadow, or a cousin, and give this palette to her for the sake of just these two shimmers, because the shimmers are still performing relatively well. It's the mattes that have given up the ghost. And I think I can probably find someone in my life who would like to have these two little shimmers on hand, or who would like to just depot those two little shimmers and throw the rest of the palette away. My Urban Decay Moon Dust palette. What a beautiful, beautiful palette. And I'm so glad that I shopped my stash for this palette last year, towards the end of last year, because I feel like I reconnected with it and I was able to get a good sense of how useful it still is to me. I feel like I remembered how much I like it. I have been reaching for it intermittently since then, and I am sure that I want to keep it. I think if I hadn't shopped my stash for it that month last year, I might be less sure. So I'm grateful to my practice of shopping my stash for having decided me about this palette in advance. My Urban Decay Electric palette, same story. I just shopped my stash for this last month. It is incredibly useful for adding intensity and depth to colorful looks, for building really exciting, bright, colorful looks. It's an all-around extremely effective palette, and I'm so glad that I have it in my collection. So it's a keeper for sure. My Natasha Danone Gold palette, my pride and joy. This was a gift from my sister for Christmas, and I genuinely could not love it more. I think it's my favorite eyeshadow palette in my collection right now. It's a total no-brainer. You can't pry it from me, I'm keeping it. All right, these are the Juvia's Place palettes that Angelica Nyqvist sent to me as a gift. And whenever I look at them and whenever I open them and use them and swatch them, I get such a warm and wonderful feeling inside because of the spirit with which that gift was given and just because of the joy with which I received it. It was such a sweet gesture and I really took it to heart. I love these palettes because of how beautiful they are and how useful some of the shadows are to me, and I also really love them because Angelica gave them to me. I, however, am going to depot them because I only want to keep some of the shadows. But you know what? My main motivation for depotting these is not actually so that I can declutter some of the eyeshadows, because I bet I'm gonna end up keeping most of them. Because I've tried these shadows, I've used them a lot, and I really do have a good use for almost all of these eyeshadows. My main reason for wanting to depot them is so that I can move the shadows around and put them into the context of other eyeshadows, because I don't like the color stories of these, but I really like a lot of the individual shadows, and I find myself reaching into these palettes just for one shadow at a time and using one shadow at a time to build looks with others of my singles. So I'm using them as singles, and it will give me so much gratification and excitement to be able to put them with my other singles, because that is essentially what they are to me. So I'm going to put both of these palettes into the depot pile. All right, second to last, but not least, my Natasha Danone Estar palette. I believe this is half empty right now. Yes, it is. I love this palette, again, not only because it's so beautiful and because I get so much use out of it, but because of the joy and pleasure with which it was received as a gift during my no-buy year. The wonderful Wendy sent it to me. And what I've done to it just this week is something that I frequently do to this palette. I've removed a bunch of the shadows and put them into a little palette so that I can travel with them. I like traveling with some of these eyeshadow palettes along with some other singles, and I love how easy it is to pop these out and pop them back in. I haven't yet really done that with the gold palette. I weirdly feel like I want to leave it intact for a little while, but this is so deeply embedded into my life, and the individual shadows, it's as if each one is its own special piece that gets moved around and used and traveled with and kind of roughed up. I really love this palette, and I'm definitely going to keep it. All right, finally, the Jaclyn Hill palette. This is also missing two eyeshadows because I've jumped the gun a little bit. I already know that I'm going to depot this palette and declutter probably most of these warm browns. I just don't need those. I think I probably really love about a third of the shadows in this palette, and I probably only want to keep about half, maybe even less than half of these. I don't really reach for this big palette very much because I feel like it's bloated with these warm browns that I don't really use. So really, ever since I got it, I've been treating it the same way that I treat the Juvia's Place palette. I've been reaching into it for individual shadows and using those individual shadows to do individual things. But I feel like I'll have a better sense of what this palette has to offer me when I have turned it into singles and only kept the ones that I love. Because right now I open it and I'm sort of overwhelmed by the arrangement and the color story, and I have to swim through the way that it looks and feels in order to reimagine the individual shadows as being useful for me, because the palette itself, as she designed it, isn't actually useful for me. So I'm going to strip all of that away. I'm going to strip away the packaging, the arrangement, the unnecessary eyeshadows, and I'm going to make the remaining shadows truly my own by adding them to my collection of singles. All right, it's time to decide about this NARS palette, and now that the deed is done and I see that I've only managed to declutter 3 palettes, I think that decides it for me. I am going to go ahead with it and declutter this palette as well. It does occur to me that the only real dupe that I had for this grungy silver right here was this grungy silver right here. So I'm letting go of both of the palettes previously in my collection that had that type of color in them. But instead of keeping one of these palettes just for that color, I am going to keep an eye out for a single eyeshadow in this color. And even though I will then have to buy that, it's worth it to me because a single eyeshadow takes up so much less space in my life than, for example, this palette. And it's okay with me to find someone who's gonna really love this and then spend $5 or $6 on a little teeny weeny single shadow that's essentially going to be the same thing for me that this has been. Because for several months, if not over a year at this point, this palette to me has only been the home for this one eyeshadow. So it's time to let it go, and these are the 3 palettes that I will be decluttering. All right, and these are the 4 palettes that I am going to be depotting. The depotting video will be coming to my channel very, very soon. I'm actually hoping to film it right after I finish filming this video. So get excited, keep an eye out, and hopefully it will all go relatively well. I'm going to take all of these eyeshadows out of these 4 palettes, and I am going to rearrange and declutter them and only keep the ones that I really, really love. Alright, so here we have my new and improved eyeshadow palette collection in its entirety. I have 7 palettes here before me. Any of you who has seen my eyeshadow palette collection video from the beginning of my no-buy year will know that at the beginning of my no-buy, around this time last year, I had 9 eyeshadow palettes. So since then, I have received a number of palettes as gifts. I haven't purchased a palette. I haven't purchased an eyeshadow palette since before my no-buy year, but I had received some as gifts, and so my collection was getting a little bit overgrown. And today, through a combination of decluttering and deciding to depot some palettes, I have gotten my collection back down, actually to be smaller than it was back then. I've gotten it down to 7. I feel very, very pleased with this collection, and to be honest, I have been leaning more and more on my single eyeshadows. I'm starting to really love curating my own single eyeshadow palettes. I feel so much more excited about selecting a beautiful single shadow here and there to add to my collection of singles and continuing to curate palettes for myself than I do about adding a bunch more pre-made palettes to this collection of 7 right here. I don't imagine that this won't grow at all. I think I probably will add a palette or 2 to this group over the next year or 2, but I hope that it won't grow by very much. I feel good about this size when it comes to my eyeshadow palette collection. It's a little bit difficult to get them all in frame, but hopefully you can see I'm keeping these 7, I am depotting these 4, and I am decluttering these 3. And that is it. That is my extremely successful, if I do say so myself, declutter of my eyeshadow palettes. I thought it was so funny that it hadn't occurred to me until I actually sat down with these palettes that I haven't bought an eyeshadow palette since before my no-buy year. And obviously that makes sense because I haven't bought any eyeshadow yet in 2019. I am on a winning streak of not buying eyeshadow. And like I said in the declutter, I have acquired some eyeshadow palettes here and there. So I started with 9 during my no-buy year. By the end of my no-buy year, I had 14, and then by getting rid of 3 and depotting 4, I got it down to 7 today. So I didn't acquire 0 eyeshadow over the course of the no-buy year, but I just love that I haven't bought any. I love that I haven't bought any. And who knows, maybe after I declutter my singles and see what I'm working with, I might make a judicious purchase of a single eyeshadow here or there to fill a hole in my collection, like that sort of warm gunmetal silver gold that was in the NARS palette, something like that. One shadow, two shadows, a tiny bit. So I might buy something, but honestly, I feel like I have so much, especially after doing all of the overhead filming with all of my eyeshadows today. I just feel like I can make glamorous, glorious, grungy editorial eye looks from here until forever, and I'm really happy with what I have. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will remember to take extra good care of yourself this week so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.